History is often a story told by the victors, but it is written by the forgotten. The historian Howard Zinn once noted that small acts, when multiplied by millions of people, can transform the world. Our common understanding of the past is a narrow narrative, crowded with kings and generals, yet it misses the countless quiet contributors whose decisions and discoveries echo through the ages. What if the real architects of our modern world are people whose names have been erased from the record? This journey uncovers 32 such individuals, from an ancient mathematician who guarded knowledge against chaos to a 20th century diplomat who brokered peace in secret. You will discover the true scale of human influence, learning how societies were quietly shaped from the shadows. How many of these hidden architects can you name before their stories unfold? A single medieval scribe, hunched over a parchment in a cold stone room, held the future in his hands. We do not know his name. His fingers were likely cramped, his eyes strained by the flickering light of a candle, as he meticulously copied the words of ancient philosophers and scientists. He was not a king or a conqueror, yet his quiet, repetitive labor became a lifeline for civilization, preserving knowledge through centuries of turmoil we call the Dark Ages. This is the essence of the unsung hero, a figure defined not by fame but by profound, often anonymous, impact. The philosopher Hannah Arendt once wrote of the banality of evil, but she also hinted at its opposite, what we might call the banality of goodness. This is the idea that extraordinary acts which sustain the world are often performed by ordinary people who simply do what is right without any thought of recognition. Their contributions were crucial, yet history overlooked them. Sometimes they worked in silence by choice. Other times they faced systemic barriers that erased their names from the record, or their stories were actively suppressed. The biographer Robert Caro, who spent decades studying powerful figures, observed that true power often resides not in grand speeches, but in the unnoticed details of governance and innovation, in the small choices made by people whose names we never learn. These individuals were typically driven by something intrinsic, a deep-seated need to serve, to innovate, or to resist injustice. Their common traits are a quiet humility, a relentless perseverance against overwhelming odds, and a focus on the long-term impact of their work, even when it meant they would never see the acclaim. Consider the tragic story of Ignaz Semmelweis. In the 1840s, this Hungarian physician pleaded with his colleagues to simply wash their hands before delivering babies, a practice that drastically reduced fatal infections in his hospital ward. He was not seeking glory, he was trying to save lives, yet his ideas were ridiculed and rejected by the medical establishment of his day. He died broken and dismissed, a man whose crucial contribution was only recognized long after his death. How many lives could have been saved if his voice had been heard? His story forces us to ask a difficult question. How do we, as a society, value contributions that do not make headlines? Do we only celebrate the loudest voices and the biggest victories, while ignoring the quiet, persistent work that truly holds our world together? As we prepare to meet the first of these hidden architects, keep this question in mind. What does it mean to shape the world from the shadows? The great library of Alexandria was a beacon in a darkening world, its halls alive with the quiet rustle of scrolls and the murmur of scholarly debate. Here in the 4th century, Hypatia stood not as an exception but as a master of her craft, a mathematician and philosopher whose voice carried authority in a society that seldom granted it to women. She moved through spaces of learning with an unwavering commitment to reason, her very presence a testament to the power of intellect over brute force. The historian Maria Dzielska captured her essence perfectly, noting that Hypatia became a symbol of the noble ideals of Greek philosophy, preserving this knowledge through her extensive commentaries and public teachings. Her work was both profound and practical. She refined the complex astrolabe, a vital tool for navigation and astronomy, and authored critical texts on geometry that would guide thinkers for generations. To her students, she made the abstract beautifully concrete. It is said she once used her own long hair to physically demonstrate the elegant curve of a hyperbola, turning a difficult mathematical concept into a tangible, unforgettable lesson. She mentored prominent figures, including a future bishop, advocating for a world where empirical inquiry outweighed blind dogma. Yet her unwavering dedication to reason made her a target in a city increasingly torn by religious conflict. Her brutal murder by a mob marked not just a personal tragedy but a chilling turning point, signaling the decline of Alexandria's academic golden age and the fragility of intellectual freedom itself. How many modern innovations in science and mathematics silently trace their lineage back to the foundational work of forgotten thinkers like Hypatia? Her story is one of resilience, a quiet flame of knowledge that refused to be extinguished, guiding us toward another ancient innovator whose practical genius was woven into the very fabric of daily life. In the year 132, a sudden clatter echoed through the Chinese imperial court. A bronze ball had dropped from a dragon's mouth into the waiting maw of a bronze toad, signaling an earthquake hundreds of miles to the west. The court was astounded, for there had been no tremors where they stood. Days later, a messenger arrived from that very direction, confirming the quake. The device that made this possible was the brainchild of Zhang Heng, a master astronomer and engineer of the Han Dynasty, whose name should be as familiar as any European Renaissance man. The historian Joseph Needham celebrated this seismoscope as a triumph of early mechanical genius, a device that harnessed a simple pendulum hidden within an ornate bronze vessel. When distant seismic waves shook the ground, the internal pendulum would swing, triggering a mechanism that released a ball from one of 8 dragon heads, indicating the direction of the tremor. This was not magic. It was a profound early grasp of how energy travels through the earth, but Zhang's mind ranged far beyond detecting quakes. He mapped the heavens with unprecedented detail, charting the stars and recognizing that the moon itself did not emit light but reflected the sun's rays. He refined the water clock, turning the steady drip of water into a reliable measure of time's passage. As a court astronomer, his role was deeply practical. He used celestial observations to advise the emperor, advocating for governance rooted in the predictable patterns of nature rather than superstition. His work was a quiet argument for an evidence-based world. Today, replicas of his seismoscope are built in classrooms to teach the fundamental principles of physics and wave propagation. It makes you wonder what other foundational technologies in our daily lives were born in the forgotten workshops of history. Zhang Heng's legacy of quiet observation and mechanical ingenuity paves the way for another kind of pioneer, one who fought battles not with instruments, but with insight into the human body itself. In an 11th century Italian coastal town, a woman suffering from a private ailment had few places to turn. The local barber surgeon might offer a crude, painful remedy, or a monastery might provide a prayer. But in Salerno, she could find something extraordinary, a female physician named Trotula. She was a master at the Scuola Medica Salernitana, a renowned medical school where she compiled groundbreaking texts that demystified women's health for centuries. Her work, The Diseases of Women, became a foundational guide, yet for generations, male scholars would question whether a woman could have produced such vital knowledge. Medical historian Monica H. Green has spent decades untangling this history, confirming Trotula's existence and her profound, empathetic approach to patient care. She did not see women's bodies as mysterious or shameful, but as subjects worthy of dedicated scientific study. She championed hygiene during childbirth to prevent deadly infections, described practical treatments for menstrual pain and infertility, and broke the era's taboos by discussing intimate health issues openly. Her methods were both compassionate and advanced. One anecdote describes her use of herbal compresses and specific positioning to ease the agonies of labor, techniques that provided comfort long before modern anesthesia. She argued that women should not suffer in silence and that their health required specialized, respectful care. Her manuscripts, translated and copied by hand, circulated across Europe for over 500 years, quietly shaping Renaissance medicine and saving countless lives from the shadows. How many mothers and daughters survived childbirth because of the wisdom preserved in her forgotten manuals? Trotula's dedication to the most marginalized areas of health finds a powerful echo in another culture, with a healer who also saw the human body as a landscape of profound, interconnected wisdom. The air in ancient India was thick with the scent of herbs and incense, but in the operating theaters of the 6th century before the Common Era, a different kind of atmosphere prevailed, one of intense focus and startling innovation. Here, Sushruta, a master physician now hailed as the father of surgery, performed procedures that would not become common in the West for over 2,000 years. Using tools crafted from branches and stones, he and his students successfully removed cataracts, set complex bone fractures, and even reconstructed damaged noses, a practice known as rhinoplasty. His life's work was meticulously compiled in the Sushruta Samhita, a comprehensive text that served as the bedrock of systematic medicine, yet his name remains largely in the shadows of history. The physician Dr. R.K. Mutatkar emphasized that Sushruta's foundational principles, particularly his insistence on human dissection for anatomical knowledge and his early understanding of sterilization, were leaps ahead of their time. His Samhita is a staggering achievement, describing over 300 different surgical operations and classifying 120 specialized instruments, from forceps to scalpels. He championed a rigorous, hands-on training model where students practiced intricate incisions on fruits and on the veins of dead animals before ever touching a human patient. His methods reveal a mind deeply concerned with both practical outcomes and ethical patient care. He used fermented rice wine as a primitive but effective antiseptic to cleanse wounds. He pioneered skin graft techniques, often taking flesh from a patient's cheek to rebuild a nose that had been amputated as a punishment, a procedure so effective it was rediscovered and celebrated in 18th century Europe. He systematically categorized diseases and their treatments, creating a logical framework for diagnosis that moved medicine away from pure superstition. This case of his rhinoplasty technique traveling across continents and centuries forces a profound question. How many other essential medical breakthroughs, things we take for granted today, have their deepest roots in ancient wisdom that was lost and later found? Sushruta's legacy is one of direct, hands-on intervention, a philosophy of building and repairing the human body that would find a parallel in leaders who sought to build and repair the very structures of society. The political heart of ancient Athens pulsed in its sun-drenched agora, a space typically reserved for citizen men. Yet one foreign-born woman, Aspasia of Miletus, navigated this world with an intellectual authority that captivated the city's most powerful minds. As the partner of the great statesman Pericles, she was far more than a consort. She was a central architect of the era's political and philosophical discourse. Classicist Madeleine M. Henry presents a compelling case that Aspasia not only influenced but likely co-authored some of Pericles' most famous speeches, including his legendary funeral oration that defined Athenian democratic ideals. Her home became a vital salon, a bustling hub where thinkers like Socrates and his students gathered to debate ethics and rhetoric. In a society that legally silenced its own women, Aspasia, a metic or resident foreigner, commanded respect through the sheer force of her intellect. Her influence was both strategic and deeply philosophical. She provided crucial counsel to Pericles throughout the tumultuous Peloponnesian War, offering perspectives on governance and diplomacy that shaped the city's fate. Her advocacy for more egalitarian values can be seen echoing in policies that expanded the rights and recognition of ordinary citizens. She even mentored a young Socrates in the art of argument, with Plato himself later acknowledging her as his teacher in rhetoric. Yet this very prominence made her a target. Comic playwrights, threatened by her power, publicly satirized her as a corrupting influence, using gossip to undermine her political sway. Her resilience was tested in a courtroom where she was forced to defend herself against charges of impiety. With Pericles himself pleading on her behalf, she secured an acquittal, a testament to her formidable stature and his unwavering respect for her mind. How many foundational political decisions, speeches that echo through millennia, were guided by the quiet counsel of an unseen advisor? Aspasia's legacy demonstrates that the most profound influence can flow from the private study into the public square, a theme that finds its parallel in a very different kind of leader, a medieval figure who would work from within a system of faith to lay the groundwork for universal law. A queen's power often rests in her alliances, but Eleanor of Aquitaine's lay in her sheer force of will. In the 12th century, this remarkable woman was Queen of France, then Queen of England, a political survivor who navigated crusades, court revolts, and imprisonment to secure a legacy for her sons. Historian Alison Weir paints a portrait of a woman who wielded unprecedented agency, not merely as a consort but as a key architect of the vast Angevin Empire, a domain that stretched from the Scottish borders to the Pyrenees. Her story begins with diplomatic marriage, but it was her sharp political mind that truly shaped events. While her first husband, King Louis VII of France, was away on the Second Crusade, Eleanor herself led her own contingent, and though the campaign ended in failure, her political education was just beginning. After securing an annulment, her swift marriage to the younger, ambitious Henry Plantagenet, who would become King Henry II of England, was a masterstroke of realpolitik, uniting her vast lands in southern France with his burgeoning territories. Yet her influence extended far beyond the marriage bed. During Henry's frequent absences, she administered their sprawling continental domains with a shrewd and capable hand, proving that a woman could govern as effectively as any king. Her patronage of the arts was not a mere diversion but a sophisticated tool of statecraft. Her courts, particularly in Poitiers, became vibrant hubs for troubadours and poets who popularized the radical ideas of courtly love. This was more than romantic entertainment. It was a cultural movement that began to humanize the brutal ideals of knighthood, weaving concepts of chivalry, respect, and emotional complexity into the fabric of medieval life. One famous anecdote describes her presiding over a so-called court of love, where noble women would hear cases and debate the intricate ethics of romance and loyalty, judgments that were later immortalized in poetry and song. This cultural renaissance, sponsored by Eleanor, subtly reshaped aristocratic behavior and expectations. Her political impact echoes through the centuries. Though she spent years imprisoned by a jealous Henry, she lived to see her sons, Richard the Lionheart and King John, ascend the throne. It was through her lineage and the political turmoil she helped create that the Magna Carta was eventually forced upon John, a document that laid the groundwork for constitutional law. Her longevity allowed her to shape multiple generations of rulers, from the battlefields of the Crusades to the negotiation tables that defined medieval Europe. How did this cultural patronage quietly reshape societies? It demonstrated that the stories a culture tells about itself, the art it celebrates, can be as powerful as any law or treaty in steering its moral and political course. Eleanor's multifaceted legacy, blending raw political power with profound cultural influence, finds a fascinating parallel in a different kind of architect, one who used observation and calculation to reshape our understanding of the cosmos itself. The rhythmic splash of water and the gentle click of gears filled a 12th century workshop in Anatolia, a soundscape of pure innovation. Here, Ismail al-Jazari, chief engineer to the Artukid court, was not merely building machines, he was writing the first comprehensive manual for automation. His book of knowledge of ingenious mechanical devices is a breathtaking portfolio of over 50 inventions, each one a perfect marriage of elegant art and precise engineering, yet his name is a whisper in the grand narrative of technological progress. The engineer and historian Donald Hill observed that al-Jazari's detailed diagrams and descriptions became a critical bridge, transmitting foundational mechanical concepts from the Islamic world to medieval Europe along bustling trade routes. His genius lay in systematizing and improving existing ideas, then recording them with such clarity that others could build upon his work. He perfected the use of the crankshaft, a component that converts rotating motion into a back and forth movement, which is now the heart of everything from a car's engine to a simple sewing machine. He designed complex valves and water-raising devices that irrigated fields with unprecedented efficiency, and he created programmable automata, including a musical robot band that could be programmed to play different rhythms, a stunning precursor to modern robotics. Consider his magnificent elephant clock, a towering symbol of cultural exchange. A carved elephant carried a howdah or canopy, which housed a complex water-powered timing mechanism. Every half hour, a ball would drop from a falcon into a dragon's mouth, a mechanical phoenix would chirp, and the elephant driver would tap a drum. This was more than a timepiece, it was a theater of physics in motion. His practical inventions solved daily problems with remarkable elegance. His peacock fountain was a masterpiece of sanitation technology. A servant would approach, and the peacock would rotate, offering a soap dish. As the servant took the soap, a hidden valve would release a stream of water for washing, and then a second mechanical servant would present a towel. This entire automated hand-washing ritual was powered by nothing more than cleverly channeled water pressure and gravity. His work profoundly influenced later European clockmakers and engineers, providing the blueprints for the mechanical revolution that would follow. It forces a simple but profound question. How many of the automated systems we rely on today, from our plumbing to our programmable devices, owe a silent debt to the forgotten workshops of the Islamic Golden Age? Al-Jazari's legacy of turning theoretical principles into tangible, working machines finds a powerful echo in a different kind of innovation, one that would use symbols and sounds to bridge continents. In the dense woods of the early 19th century, a Cherokee silversmith named Sequoyah saw his world changing. He had no formal schooling, but he possessed a quiet, relentless determination to give his people a tool for survival, a written language. While American expansion pressed in around them, Sequoyah dedicated over a decade of his life to a single, audacious goal, creating a complete writing system from nothing. Linguist Ellen Cushman explains that his syllabary was a work of pure genius, a set of 85 characters where each symbol represented a syllable in the Cherokee language. This made it incredibly intuitive to learn, far more so than the complex spelling rules of English. He faced deep skepticism, even ridicule, from those who thought his project was foolish or dangerous. At one point, his own wife burned his early work, believing he was engaging in witchcraft. Undeterred, Sequoyah started again. He isolated himself for long periods, scratching new characters onto bark and shingles. To prove the system worked, his most powerful test was teaching his young daughter, Ioka. Within days, she was reading and writing, a living demonstration that shattered all doubt. The Cherokee nation embraced the syllabary with astonishing speed. Within a few years, literacy rates among the Cherokee surpassed those of their white neighbors, creating a reading public almost overnight. This linguistic revolution sparked a printing one. Using a printing press with custom-made type, the Cherokee began publishing the Cherokee Phoenix, a bilingual newspaper that became a vital source of news and a powerful voice for tribal sovereignty. When the trauma of forced removal, the Trail of Tears, tore families from their ancestral lands, the written word became a tether. People used the syllabary to send letters, record stories, and preserve laws, holding their community together across a brutal journey. Sequoyah's own commitment was absolute. A story tells that he once burned his entire collection of early notes, not in frustration, but to clear his mind and focus only on the most elegant, functional symbols. His act forces us to ask a profound question. How does the creation of a language, of a written voice, empower a people facing cultural extinction? It provides not just a means of communication, but a fortress for identity. Sequoyah's gift of letters ensured that Cherokee culture could not be so easily erased, a legacy of preservation that finds a powerful parallel in a different kind of stewardship, one focused on preserving the natural world itself. A single acacia seedling, its roots cradled in Kenyan soil, became a quiet act of defiance. In the 1970s, Wangari Maathai listened to the women in rural villages, hearing their stories of walking farther for firewood and watching their streams dry up. She understood that the cracked earth was not just an environmental crisis, it was a crisis of poverty and powerlessness. With a simple, revolutionary idea, she handed a woman a sapling and asked her to plant it, igniting the Green Belt movement. Maathai, a biologist and the first woman in East and Central Africa to earn a doctorate, could have remained in academia. Instead, she chose the dirt road, mobilizing a network of women to become foresters in their own communities. Her autobiography captures that driving force, an inner voice that simply said there is a problem, and I have got to do something about it. Her genius was in connecting the dots. Planting a tree was not just about greenery, it was about giving women a source of income from the seedlings they nurtured. It was about securing food and clean water. It was a lesson in self-reliance that empowered them to challenge a corrupt government seizing public lands. Maathai faced brutal persecution for this work, being jailed, beaten, and publicly vilified by a regime that saw her grassroots organizing as a threat. Yet she persevered, and her movement grew from that first seedling to over 50 million trees. Her most iconic stand was for Uhuru Park in Nairobi, when the government planned to erect a massive skyscraper in the beloved public space. Maathai led the charge against it. She confronted the authorities with unwavering resolve, using the law and public protest to defend this green lung for the city's poor. Her successful campaign to save the park became a national symbol of resistance, proving that collective, localized action could topple the plans of the powerful. Her legacy is a forest of change, inspiring similar reforestation efforts across Africa and the globe. When she received the Nobel Peace Prize in 2004, becoming the first African woman to do so, the world finally recognized what the women in the villages had long known, that peace is impossible without a healthy, sustainable foundation for life. Her story compels us to ask, how can our own small, individual acts of care, multiplied across communities, scale to genuinely heal a wounded planet? Wangari Maathai's profound belief that ecology and justice are one and the same finds a powerful echo in another advocate who fought for the most fundamental of human dignities. On the sweltering morning of August 28, 1963, 250,000 people converged on the National Mall, their faces turned toward the Lincoln Memorial. The air hummed with a potent mix of hope and tension, a gathering so vast and peaceful it seemed to defy the very laws of logistics. The man who orchestrated this miracle was not on the main stage delivering a timeless speech. He was backstage, a clipboard in his hand, quietly managing the intricate details that held the entire event together. Bayard Rustin, a gay black pacifist, was the master architect of the March on Washington, a civil rights strategist of unparalleled skill who mentored a young Martin Luther King Jr. in the principles of nonviolent resistance. Historian John D'Amelio underscores a crucial truth that the movement's tactical successes, from the Montgomery bus boycott to the march itself, were deeply rooted in Rustin's meticulous planning and his profound understanding of Gandhian philosophy. His role was exhaustive. He drafted the march's original blueprint, a 20-page manual that covered everything from bus parking and portable toilet placement to training thousands of volunteer marshals into escalation techniques. He ran workshops where activists practiced how to remain peaceful in the face of brutal provocation, turning a philosophical ideal into a disciplined, potent weapon. His vision for the march extended beyond civil rights to encompass a broad platform for economic justice, demanding a federal jobs program and a higher minimum wage. Yet, despite his central role, Rustin was often pushed into the shadows. His sexual orientation and his brief past association with the Young Communist League made him a target for opponents within and outside the movement, leading to his deliberate erasure from many mainstream accounts of that historic day. One anecdote captures his genius for logistics perfectly. In the days leading up to the march, a crisis emerged as hundreds of buses were delayed or lost. Rustin had anticipated this. He set up a dedicated communication center with ham radios and a team of runners, tracking each bus's progress and rerouting them seamlessly, ensuring that not a single planned arrival time was missed. His organizing model, a perfect fusion of moral vision and operational precision, became a template that influenced protest movements across the globe. In his later years, he bridged his lifelong activism to champion the cause of LGBTQ+ rights, arguing that the fight for human dignity is interconnected and universal. His entire life forces a difficult reflection. How many of the social changes we now take for granted were engineered by marginalized organizers who were forced to work from the shadows, their contributions overlooked because of who they were? Bayard Rustin's legacy demonstrates that the most powerful strategies for change are often forged by those who understand oppression from every angle, a theme of quiet, strategic brilliance that finds a parallel in a scientific innovator who also worked outside the spotlight. The air in a King's College laboratory in 1951 was thick with the hum of machinery and the faint, sharp scent of developing chemicals. Here, Rosalind Franklin, a chemist with a formidable intellect and an uncompromising eye for detail, aimed a fine X-ray beam at a carefully prepared fiber of DNA. The result was not a grand announcement, but a single, ghostly image stamped with the number 51. This photograph, a stark cross of black dots, held the secret blueprint of life itself, the double helix structure of DNA. Franklin's mind was a perfect instrument for this work. Biographer Brenda Maddox captured her essence, noting her exacting standards and clarity of thought produced the crystalline evidence that would ultimately unlock modern genetics. She had mastered the painstaking art of X-ray crystallography, a technique that uses the scattering of X-rays to reveal the atomic structure of a molecule. Her genius lay in her meticulous preparation, creating perfectly hydrated DNA fibers that yielded the clearest diffraction patterns ever seen. From these patterns, she deduced crucial facts that others had missed: the molecule's helical shape, its precise diameter, and the fact that the sugar-phosphate backbones had to be on the outside. Her own research notebooks reveal she was independently closing in on the correct model, calculating angles and testing structures with methodical precision. Yet, in a story now infamous in scientific history, her critical data, including the seminal Photo 51, was shown without her knowledge or consent to her rivals, James Watson and Francis Crick. This single image provided them with the final, crucial piece of their theoretical puzzle. When the double helix model was announced, her foundational role was relegated to a mere footnote, an acknowledgement of her unpublished data. The ultimate recognition, the Nobel Prize awarded to Watson, Crick, and her own colleague Maurice Wilkins in 1962, came 4 years after her death from ovarian cancer, a tragic silencing that prevented her from ever telling her side of the story. Her brilliance was not confined to DNA. In later work on the tobacco mosaic virus, she produced strikingly clear images that laid the essential groundwork for understanding the structure of RNA, once again pioneering a path that others would later walk. She navigated a scientific world rife with gender discrimination, often excluded from the casual, collegial exchanges where ideas were freely traded among male peers. Her story forces a haunting question that echoes through laboratories still. How many scientific truths, how many world-changing discoveries are buried in unattributed data or carried in the minds of researchers who never received their due? Rosalind Franklin's quiet pursuit of clarity, her battle for recognition in a world unprepared for her intellect, finds a powerful parallel in another figure whose mathematical genius was also nearly lost to history. The wind screamed across an endless expanse of white, a frozen desert where the very air could kill. In April 1909, after a final, brutal push, it was Matthew Henson, an African-American explorer, who first reached the spot they had sacrificed everything to find. He was the one who planted the flag at the North Pole, standing beside Commander Robert Peary, yet for decades his name would be a footnote, his indispensable role faded by the prejudice of the era. Historian S. Allen Counter, who fought to restore Henson's legacy, put it plainly: he was the one who built the sledges, trained the teams, and mastered the Arctic techniques that made the entire expedition possible. Henson was not merely an assistant, he was the operational heart of the mission. He had spent years living in Greenland, immersing himself in Inuit communities. He did not just observe, he learned, becoming fluent in the language, mastering the intricate art of dog sledding, and learning to construct the life-saving igloos that sheltered the team from the killing cold. On the trail, his expertise was so superior that he often broke the path, navigating the treacherous, shifting ice while Peary, exhausted and sometimes unable to walk, followed in the sled. One harrowing anecdote defines his loyalty and skill. During a ferocious blizzard that blinded the party, with supplies running dangerously low, it was Henson who ventured out into the storm. Using hunting techniques taught to him by his Inuit friends, he successfully tracked and secured a seal, providing the food that saved Peary's life and allowed the expedition to continue. Without this cross-cultural knowledge, the quest would have ended in tragedy. Later in life, Henson's own memoirs offered a raw, unvarnished look at the brutal realities of polar exploration, a perspective often sanitized in the official accounts led by Peary. His belated recognition, including a posthumous medal from the National Geographic Society, was a small correction for a lifetime of overlooked achievement. His entire journey forces a critical question: how many of history's great explorations, these celebrated firsts, were entirely dependent on the cross-cultural collaboration and indigenous knowledge that the official record so often erased? Matthew Henson's story of perseverance against both nature and prejudice finds a powerful parallel in a humanitarian whose quiet work also saved lives, one act of compassion at a time. The streets of Warsaw in 1942 were a landscape of pure fear where a single glance could mean death. Irena Sendler, a Polish social worker, walked these streets daily, her heart set on a single, dangerous mission: to save as many children as possible from the horrors of the ghetto. As a key member of Zagota, the clandestine Polish resistance council to aid Jews, she orchestrated one of the most daring rescue operations of the entire war, smuggling an estimated 2,500 Jewish children to safety. Her method was as ingenious as it was heartbreaking. She and her network of collaborators used sewer tunnels, secret compartments in ambulances, and even toolboxes to spirit children out. Once they were safe, she faced an equally profound task: preserving their identities. She kept meticulous records of each child's real name, their new Christian alias, and their hiding place, writing the details on thin strips of paper. These she sealed in glass jars and buried beneath an old apple tree in a friend's garden, a hidden archive against the tide of annihilation. Historian Irene Tomaszewski captured the essence of her motivation, describing it not as a desire for fame, but as a simple, unyielding need to help. This moral conviction fueled her through unimaginable risks. She would enter the ghetto under the guise of inspecting for typhus, using the opportunity to coordinate escapes and provide food and medicine. She convinced parents to part with their children, a task of unbearable emotional weight. She would promise terrified mothers and fathers that she would bring their sons and daughters back to them after the war, a pledge made in hope against the grim reality of the camps. This was a profound act of trust, a gamble on an uncertain future to save a life in the present. Her work demanded immense courage from everyone involved. The children had to be taught to remain perfectly silent during their escapes, to recite new Christian prayers, and to forget their past lives in an instant. The network of foster families, convents, and orphanages that took them in risked execution for their compassion. In 1943, the Gestapo captured Irena Sendler. They subjected her to brutal torture, breaking her feet and legs, yet she revealed nothing about her network or the hidden children. Sentenced to death, she was rescued at the last moment by Zagota, who bribed a German guard to secure her release. She spent the rest of the war in hiding, but the jars remained safely buried. After the war, she dug them up and began the painstaking work of reuniting children with any surviving relatives, though for so many there was no one left to find. Her story, suppressed by Poland's communist government for decades, only gained global recognition late in her life, leading to a Nobel Peace Prize nomination. What compels an ordinary person to perform such extraordinary acts of bravery, to stare into the abyss and choose to save a single life, then another and another? Irena Sendler's quiet defiance, her commitment to preserving human identity against systematic erasure, demonstrates that the most powerful resistance is often a simple, stubborn act of care. This profound belief in human dignity finds a parallel in a different kind of rescue, one that sought to save not individuals but an entire nation from economic collapse. The oppressive heat of a 1970s Bangladeshi village was not just a matter of weather, it was the texture of poverty itself. A group of women, skilled artisans who wove beautiful bamboo stools, were trapped in a cycle of debt to local loan sharks, earning pennies for a full day's labor. Muhammad Yunus, a professor of economics, walked into this scene and asked a simple question that would upend global finance. How much money would it take for these women to be free? The answer was a sum so small it was almost invisible to traditional banks, $27. Yunus took that amount from his own pocket and lent it to 42 people, an act of radical trust that sparked a revolution. He was not a banker in the traditional sense, but a visionary who saw the poor not as liabilities, but as untapped entrepreneurs. His philosophy, captured in his book Banker to the Poor, framed the issue with elegant clarity. He wrote, "The poor are like bonsai trees. There is nothing wrong with their seeds, only society never gave them a base to grow on." He believed that poverty was not a personal failure, but a systemic one, created by financial institutions that refused to see the potential in the world's most marginalized people. His response was the Grameen Bank, built on principles that defied conventional wisdom. He eliminated the need for collateral, the very barrier that locked the poor out of the system. Instead, he pioneered a group lending model where small circles of borrowers, often women, would guarantee each other's loans. This created a powerful web of mutual accountability and support, turning social capital into financial security. His focus on women was intentional and transformative. He recognized that investing in a woman often meant investing in her entire family, leading to better nutrition, education, and health outcomes. Consider the impact of that first loan of $27. It allowed those basket weavers to purchase their own bamboo outright, freeing them from the predatory lenders. For the first time, their profit was their own, a small surplus that could be reinvested, saved, or used to send a child to school. This was not charity, it was a hand up, a tool for self-determination. The Grameen model proved that the poor were not only creditworthy, they were astonishingly reliable, maintaining repayment rates that often surpassed those of wealthy clients in traditional banks. This trust-based system challenged the core assumptions of an entire industry, demonstrating that financial inclusion could be both ethically sound and economically viable. From that single village, the idea spread like a quiet fire, inspiring microfinance institutions across the globe and empowering millions of small-scale entrepreneurs to build their own futures from the ground up. His work earned him the Nobel Peace Prize, a recognition that economic justice is a fundamental pillar of peace. Yet, the sheer simplicity of his model is sometimes overshadowed by complex economic theories. It forces a crucial question for our own time. How can our economic tools, our systems of lending and investment, be fundamentally redesigned for genuine equity, to give every bonsai tree the soil it needs to reach its full height? Muhammad Yunus' legacy is a testament to the power of reimagining value itself, a theme that resonates deeply with a different kind of preservation, one focused not on economics, but on the soul of a culture. The rhythm of a southern juke joint, the rich cadence of a folktale told on a dusty porch, these were the sounds Zora Neale Hurston fought to capture. In the vibrant heart of the 1920s Harlem Renaissance, while many artists looked forward, Zora deliberately looked back, traveling deep into the American South to collect the stories, songs, and spiritual traditions of rural Black communities. She was not just a writer, she was a trained anthropologist, a student of the pioneering Franz Boas, and she wielded her pen with a singular mission: to preserve the cultural soul of her people in its full, unvarnished glory. Her masterpiece, Their Eyes Were Watching God, is a lyrical novel that does more than tell a story. It immerses the reader in the specific dialect, dreams, and deep emotional world of its heroine, Janie Crawford. Zora presented Black life not as a problem to be solved, but as a human experience to be celebrated, a vision the writer Alice Walker later championed, noting that Zora gives us a sense of black people as complete, complex, undiminished human beings. Her fieldwork was an act of radical preservation. She did not merely observe, she participated, learning the intricate rituals of hoodoo in New Orleans and recording the exact dialects of turpentine camps in Florida. She saw these oral traditions as a sophisticated and vital art form, a repository of history, philosophy, and survival. Her political independence, however, sometimes set her at odds with her peers. She rejected the idea that black literature must primarily be a protest against racism, believing that the intimate, daily realities of black love, joy, and spiritual striving were just as politically potent. This stance, combined with a fierce individualism, led to her falling out of favor as the cultural tide shifted. She died in poverty in 1960, her work largely forgotten, her grave unmarked. It was Walker who, over a decade later, literally rediscovered her burial site and placed a headstone that read, "A Genius of the South." Zora's anthropological work was as bold as her fiction. She traveled to Haiti on a Guggenheim Fellowship, immersing herself in the study of Vodou, not as an outsider looking for sensationalism, but as a respectful scholar. Her resulting book, Tell My Horse, is a groundbreaking study that blended personal narrative with rigorous ethnographic detail, offering a rare and empathetic window into the religion's practices and their social meaning. Her legacy forces a profound question upon us, one that echoes from her forgotten grave to the stories we tell today. How does the act of preserving stories, of giving voice to a people's own narrative, fundamentally shape our collective identity and resilience? Zora Neale Hurston dedicated her life to proving that culture lives in the words we speak and the songs we sing, a belief in preservation that finds a powerful parallel in a woman who fought to save lives by reforming the most fundamental of human institutions. The air in post-Civil War Richmond, Virginia, was thick with the lingering trauma of slavery and the desperate hope of freedom. Through this landscape walked Rebecca Lee Crumpler, the first African-American woman to earn a medical degree in the United States, carrying her skills into communities the white medical establishment had utterly abandoned. She had graduated from the New England Female Medical College in 1864, and instead of pursuing a comfortable practice, she dedicated herself to the recently emancipated, working with the Freedmen's Bureau to provide care for thousands of freed slaves. Historian Dr. Vanessa Northington Gamble underscores the magnitude of this act, noting that Crumpler's subsequent book of medical discourses was one of the very first medical publications by an African American, a public health guide aimed directly at women and children. Her philosophy was revolutionary for its time, focusing intensely on preventive care and hygiene. She understood that true healing meant empowering her patients with knowledge, teaching them how to care for their families with the limited resources they had. She would travel from one crowded tenement to another, demonstrating how proper nutrition and sanitation could prevent the spread of typhoid and dysentery. During a terrifying cholera outbreak, her commitment became a lifeline. While others fled, she moved toward the epicenter of the disease, setting up makeshift clinics to treat the afflicted and tirelessly educating families on boiling water and isolating the sick to curb the contagion. Her medical guide, published in 1883, was the culmination of this life-saving work. It was not a dense academic text, but a practical manual written in clear, accessible language, offering remedies and advice for common ailments, from teething infants to digestive complaints, designed to be used in the home. This was healthcare democratized, taken out of the exclusive domain of male physicians, and placed into the hands of mothers and community caregivers. Her very existence as a doctor challenged the twin pillars of racism and sexism, paving the way for the black women in medicine who would follow. yet her name is absent from most historical curriculums. How many persistent health disparities in marginalized communities today might look different if the wisdom and methods of pioneers like Rebecca Lee Crumpler had been centered rather than forgotten? Her story of healing against all odds finds a powerful parallel in a scientist who sought to heal the planet itself from a different kind of sickness. A simple glass cylinder sat in the sunlight of 1856, and inside it, a scientist watched the future of our planet unfold. The scientist was Eunice Newton Foote, an American researcher who, with a remarkably straightforward experiment, discovered the fundamental mechanism of global warming. She filled glass jars with different gases, placed them in the sun, and measured their temperatures. Her results were unequivocal. The cylinder containing carbon dioxide became much hotter than the others and retained its heat longer. She had demonstrated the heat-trapping property of a greenhouse gas a full 3 years before the renowned Irish scientist John Tyndall published his similar and far more famous conclusions. Climate scientist Catherine Hayhoe has brought renewed attention to Foote's work, pointing out that her simple apparatus of cylinders and thermometers revealed a truth that would take the world over a century to fully grasp. In her paper presented to the American Association for the Advancement of Science, Foote made a stunningly prescient hypothesis. She wrote that an atmosphere of that gas would give to our Earth a high temperature, and that if, at one period of its history, the air had mixed with it a larger proportion of carbon dioxide, an increased temperature from its own action must have necessarily resulted. She was describing ancient climate change, connecting carbon dioxide levels to planetary warming, a concept that was generations ahead of its time. Yet when her paper was presented at the scientific meeting, she was not allowed to read it herself. A male colleague had to do it for her. Her work was published in the association's proceedings, but it was then largely ignored and forgotten, overshadowed by Tyndall's later, more detailed research. Her scientific mind was matched by a profound social conscience. Eunice Newton Foote was also a committed suffragist, one of the original signatories to the historic Seneca Falls Declaration of Sentiments in 1848, which demanded civil rights for women. She understood that the fight for knowledge and the fight for justice were intertwined, that a voice silenced in the laboratory was a voice lost to the world. Her story forces a haunting reflection. How many other foundational discoveries, insights that could have prepared us for the challenges we face today, were sidelined or erased simply because of the gender of the person who made them? Eunice Foote's quiet, dogged pursuit of truth, in both science and society, finds a powerful parallel in a different kind of visionary, one who sought not to understand the climate, but to change the political weather of an entire nation. A thunderous applause echoed through European parlors and lecture halls, not for a military victory, but for its opposite. Bertha von Suttner's novel, Lay Down Your Arms, became a literary sensation in 1889. Its pages a visceral indictment of war's human cost that galvanized a continent weary of endless conflict. An Austrian countess who traded the comfort of her aristocratic life for the trenches of diplomacy, Bertha wielded her pen as a weapon for peace. Her story is one of persuasive power, proving that a single voice, amplified through art and relentless advocacy, can challenge the very foundations of militarism. Her most crucial relationship was with the Swedish inventor of dynamite, Alfred Nobel. In a twist of fate, she had briefly worked as his secretary and housekeeper in her youth, and the two maintained a lifelong correspondence. It was Bertha who persistently mentored the brilliant but troubled industrialist, urging him to use his vast fortune to promote peace. She wrote to him, demanding to know if he would create an institution to rival the destructiveness of his own inventions. Her influence was direct and profound. Nobel himself later wrote to a friend that Bertha von Suttner had done more for peace than any other woman, a testament to her power to reshape a legacy. Her activism was not confined to letters and novels. She founded the Austrian Peace Society, becoming a formidable organizer who corresponded with kings and presidents, pressing them to consider international arbitration over battlefield slaughter. She organized major peace conferences that brought together diplomats and thinkers, laying the essential groundwork for the Hague Conventions, which sought to establish rules of war and a permanent court for arbitration. Her work challenged the deeply ingrained belief that national strength was measured solely in military might, arguing instead for a global community bound by law and dialogue. In 1905, her lifetime of effort was crowned when she became the first woman to be awarded the Nobel Peace Prize, a direct result of her mentorship of Alfred Nobel himself. Her story forces a timeless question upon us. Can art and dialogue truly prevent conflict? Bertha von Suttner staked her life on the belief that they could, that a novel could change hearts and a letter could sway an emperor. Her legacy of using narrative and diplomacy as tools for change finds a powerful parallel in a different kind of architect, one who used gears and circuits to build a new reality. Amid the glitter and glamour of 1940s Hollywood, a star known for her captivating beauty was quietly filing a patent that would one day underpin our wireless world. Hedy Lamarr, an actress celebrated on the silver screen, was also a self-taught inventor who co-created a secret communication system designed to guide torpedoes past enemy jamming. Her story is a stunning testament to the intellect that can flourish in the most unexpected of places. Working with avant-garde composer George Antheil, she devised a method they called frequency hopping. Their system used the mechanism from a player piano roll to make a radio signal jump between 88 different frequencies, a number corresponding to the keys on a piano, in a synchronized sequence known only to the transmitter and receiver. This made any attempt to block or intercept the signal virtually impossible. As journalist Richard Rhodes noted, Lamarr and Antheil solved one of the biggest problems of radio-guided weapons with this brilliantly unorthodox idea. Yet when she presented her invention to the United States Navy, they dismissed it. Officials could not see past her celebrity, viewing the patent as a frivolous contribution from a movie star and politely suggesting she instead use her fame to sell war bonds. The technology was shelved and the patent eventually expired. It was not until the 1960s, during the Cuban Missile Crisis, that the military rediscovered and implemented her concept, using it for secure communications on naval ships. This was just the beginning. The core principle of spread spectrum technology, hopping or spreading a signal across a wide band of frequencies, became the bedrock for the civilian technologies we now take for granted, from the Wi-Fi that connects your home to the Bluetooth that links your devices. Lamarr lived to see this belated recognition, being inducted into the National Inventors Hall of Fame shortly before her death. Her life forces a powerful question about the very nature of innovation. How many world-changing breakthroughs have emerged from Chinese letter collaboration, from the fusion of seemingly unrelated fields like music and munitions, art and engineering? Hedy Lamarr's legacy proves that genius is not confined to the laboratory, a theme of unexpected influence that finds its echo in a very different kind of architect, one who sought to reform society from the ground up. The morning of March 25, 1911, was seared into her memory forever. Frances Perkins, then a young social worker, stood helpless in a crowd as black smoke billowed from the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory. She watched in horror as workers, mostly young immigrant women, jumped from the 8th and 9th floors to their deaths on the pavement below. 146 lives were lost that day, a tragedy born of locked doors and non-existent safety codes. This was the fire that forged an architect of the American safety net. 2 decades later, as Franklin Delano Roosevelt's Secretary of Labor, she was the first woman ever to serve in a presidential cabinet, and she carried the memory of those falling bodies into every negotiation. Historian Kirsten Downey makes it clear that fire was the crucible. It transformed her from a sympathetic observer into a relentless force for systemic change, a woman who believed government had a moral duty to protect its most vulnerable citizens. Her title was Secretary of Labor, but her real role was Chief Architect of the New Deal, the series of programs that would pull America back from the brink of the Great Depression. Her contributions were not made on the campaign trail, but in quiet, smoke-filled rooms where she wielded data and pragmatism as her primary tools. She championed unemployment insurance to catch people when they fell, a ban on child labor to protect the young, and federal standards for workplace safety so no one would ever have to die like the Triangle workers again. Her method was meticulous. Before pushing for old age pensions, a radical idea at the time, she spent years compiling exhaustive data on poverty among the elderly. She presented Roosevelt with charts and graphs that painted an undeniable picture of human suffering, convincing him that this provision was not just a moral imperative, but a practical necessity for a stable society. This became the bedrock of the Social Security Act. Her legacy is woven into the fabric of daily American life. The minimum wage that ensures a basic standard of living, the 40-hour work week that provides time for family, the promise of support in retirement, all bear the quiet imprint of her relentless behind-the-scenes work. Her policies lifted millions from destitution and established a model for social welfare that nations around the world would later emulate. It makes you wonder, how do these bureaucratic efforts, these endless meetings and pages of legislation, actually translate into tangible change in a family's life? The answer is found in a single paycheck that can cover rent, in an elderly person living with dignity, in a child kept out of a factory, and inside a classroom. Frances Perkins' story is one of profound patience, proving that the most enduring structures of society are built not with grand speeches, but with painstaking policy and data-driven compassion. This quiet, persistent work of building a better system finds a vibrant parallel in a cultural pioneer who used an entirely different medium to reshape the American imagination. A stark black and white photograph from 1942 shows a black woman standing before the American flag, a broom in one hand and a mop in the other, her gaze fixed directly on the viewer with a weary, unflinching defiance. This was Gordon Parks's American Gothic, a searing rebuttal to the myth of post-war equality, created by a self-taught photographer who transformed his camera into a weapon for social change. Parks saw his lens not as a passive observer, but as a tool for confrontation, stating plainly, "I saw that the camera could be a weapon against poverty, against racism, against all sorts of social wrongs." His mission was to make the invisible visible, to force a segregated America to look at the lives it had chosen to ignore. His multifaceted genius allowed him to navigate worlds that were often closed to black artists. As the first black staff photographer and writer for Life magazine, he gained access to a massive mainstream audience, and he used that platform with profound responsibility. His groundbreaking photo essay, Harlem Gang Leader, did not simply document violence, it humanized its subject, a young man named Red Jackson, revealing the complex social and economic forces that shaped his life. Parks spent weeks earning the gang's trust, capturing moments of vulnerability and domesticity alongside the tension and danger, forcing readers to see a person, not a stereotype. This empathetic approach became his signature. he turned his camera on the everyday realities of segregation, from the quiet dignity of a black family in the rural South to the systemic poverty of northern urban neighborhoods. His work did more than report the news. It shaped the very conscience of the civil rights movement, providing a visual narrative that fueled public outrage and empathy. But his artistic battlefronts were multiple. In Hollywood, he broke another formidable barrier, becoming the first black director of a major studio film with Shaft in 1971. While some criticized the film's genre, its success was revolutionary, proving that a black-led narrative could achieve massive commercial success and empowering a new wave of filmmakers. Beyond the camera and the director's chair, he was also a celebrated composer and writer, a true Renaissance man whose diverse talents all served his central purpose: to tell stories that challenged power. His photograph of American Gothic forces a timeless question: how can a single image, a piece of art, challenge the deepest foundations of societal norms? Gordon Parks demonstrated that a story told with emotional truth can dismantle prejudice more effectively than any lecture, a legacy of visual advocacy that finds a powerful parallel in a woman who used the classroom as her instrument for change. The rented cottage in Daytona Beach, Florida, had a dirt floor and a roof that leaked, but it was filled with an unshakable faith. In 1904, with just $1.50 in her pocket, Mary McLeod Bethune founded the Daytona Educational and Industrial Training School for Negro girls. Her first 5 students sat on crates, using burned wood for pencils and old inkwells for lessons. This humble beginning was the seed of what would become Bethune-Cookman University, a monument to her belief that education was the master key to liberation. As educator Dr. Jonetta B. Cole observed, Bethune's entire life was driven by a profound faith in education as a tool for liberation, a conviction that propelled her from a one-room schoolhouse to the highest corridors of power. Her work was never confined to the classroom. She understood that true empowerment required political and economic muscle, so she mobilized a national network of black women's clubs, transforming them into a formidable force for change. This grassroots organizing caught the attention of President Franklin D. Roosevelt, who appointed her as the director of the Division of Negro Affairs within the National Youth Administration. In this role, she became the highest-ranking African-American woman in government, fighting to ensure that New Deal programs served black communities fairly, securing jobs and educational opportunities for thousands of young people during the Great Depression. Her advocacy was fearless and far-reaching. She lobbied tirelessly for a federal anti-lynching law and for the protection of voting rights, bringing the urgent realities of racial violence and disenfranchisement directly to the president. Her political influence was magnified by a powerful friendship with First Lady Eleanor Roosevelt. The two women would often meet for tea at the White House, and in those private conversations, Bethune pressed the case for civil rights, persuading Eleanor to use her platform to speak out against segregation and to attend public events that championed racial equality. This alliance brought black issues to the forefront of national policy in an unprecedented way. Her legacy of institution building extended beyond her own university. Seeing the financial fragility of black colleges across the country, she co-founded the United Negro College Fund, creating a collaborative fundraising engine that has supported generations of students and famously reminded America that a mind is a terrible thing to waste. How does education serve as a catalyst for social mobility? Mary McLeod Bethune's life answers that it is the foundational act, the process of equipping a people not just with knowledge, but with the confidence and critical thinking to demand their place in the world. Her story of building enduring structures for learning and power paves the way for another kind of communicator, one who sought to explain the universe itself. The universe was a vast, cold expanse, but Carl Sagan made it feel like home. His voice, narrating the journey of the Voyager probe, transformed a single pixel of light into the pale blue dot, an image that humbled humanity and ignited a global sense of cosmic wonder. Sagan was an astronomer and author who dedicated his life to a single, radical act, making profound science accessible to everyone. He took concepts like the greenhouse effect and the terrifying theory of nuclear winter and translated them into language that resonated in living rooms and classrooms, though some academic peers dismissed his popular work as a distraction from serious research. His wife and collaborator, Anne Druyan, captured the core of his mission, noting that Sagan believed science is a way of thinking much more than it is a body of knowledge. For him, the scientific method was a toolkit for everyday life, a defense against superstition and unquestioned authority. His advocacy stretched to the stars, where he was a passionate proponent for the search for extraterrestrial intelligence, arguing that the quest itself expanded our understanding of life and our place in the cosmos. He harnessed the power of media with breathtaking success. His television series, Cosmos, was not just a show, it was a cultural event that reached over 500 million people across the globe, while his books inspired generations of future physicists, biologists, and engineers. His impact was felt in the halls of power as well. In 1985, he delivered stark testimony before the United States Congress on the looming threat of climate change. He did not bury the politicians in complex graphs. Instead, he used a simple, powerful analogy, comparing the carbon dioxide building up in our atmosphere to a blanket steadily warming the planet. He made the data undeniable and the consequences clear, demonstrating that scientific literacy is not a luxury, but a necessity for survival. How does public engagement truly shape scientific progress? Carl Sagan proved that when complex ideas are shared with clarity and passion, they cease to be academic abstractions and become a shared human inheritance, fueling the curiosity that drives all discovery. His work to communicate peril and promise from the cosmic scale finds a parallel in a humanitarian who delivered aid on the most human scale. The desert sun beat down on a makeshift clinic in Central Australia, its corrugated iron walls offering little relief from the oppressive heat. Inside, Fred Hollows, a New Zealand-born ophthalmologist with a no-nonsense demeanor, leaned over a patient, his hands steady as he performed a delicate cataract surgery. It was the 1970s, and Hollows was traveling to some of the most remote indigenous communities, confronting a tidal wave of avoidable blindness with a fierce, practical compassion. He was not driven by a desire for fame, but by a radical, leveling belief, a conviction his colleague Gabby Hollows often highlighted, that every eye is an eye. This simple, profound principle meant that a person's wealth or postcode should never determine whether they could see. His work was a quiet rebellion against a global health system that had accepted blindness as an inevitable fact of life for the world's poor. Hollows understood that the real problem was not a lack of medical knowledge, but a catastrophic failure of access and affordability. A standard intraocular lens, the tiny plastic implant that restores vision after cataract removal, cost hundreds of dollars in the West, a price that put it out of reach for millions. So he decided to build a new system from the ground up. He established workshops in Nepal and Eritrea to manufacture these lenses locally, slashing the cost to just a few dollars each. This was not a temporary aid mission. It was a sustainable solution designed to outlive him. He invested even more deeply in training local surgeons, empowering them to become the permanent eye care providers for their own communities. His commitment to this work was absolute, often operating in the most challenging conditions imaginable. One anecdote from his time in Eritrea captures his spirit. In the midst of a brutal civil war with the sound of distant shelling as a constant backdrop, Hollows and his team set up a clinic in a bombed-out building. They worked by the light of kerosene lamps, using sterilized instruments on wooden tables, restoring sight to hundreds who had lived in darkness for years. His legacy, however, extends beyond the operating theater. He was a vocal and unyielding advocate for land rights for Aboriginal peoples, arguing that you could not separate a person's health from their connection to country and their freedom from systemic injustice. Today, the Fred Hollows Foundation continues this mission in over 25 countries, having restored sight to millions. His life forces a difficult but essential question upon us all. How can our most life-changing healthcare innovations be designed and distributed so they are truly accessible to every person, regardless of where they are born? Fred Hollows answered this with action, proving that the most profound medicine is often a blend of technical genius and a relentless demand for justice. This dedication to reforming broken systems from within finds a powerful parallel in the work of a legal pioneer who fought to change the law itself. The law library at Howard University was a war room in the 1930s, and its commanding general was a man named Charles Hamilton Houston, a brilliant attorney who had been the first black editor of the Harvard Law Review. Houston was not planning a protest, he was engineering a revolution from within the legal system itself. As the NAACP First Special Counsel, he devised a meticulous, multi-generational strategy to dismantle the entire legal foundation of segregation, a plan so thorough he would later be called the man who killed Jim Crow. Historian Jenna Ray McNeil perfectly captured his method, calling it social engineering through law. Houston believed the courts could be compelled, case by careful case, to live up to the constitutional promise of equal protection. His most powerful weapon was his classroom at Howard University's law school, which he transformed into an incubator for civil rights attorneys. Here, he mentored a generation of legal warriors, most notably a young and fiery Thurgood Marshall, instilling in them the discipline and strategic thinking the long battle would require. His work was exhaustive and unglamorous. He traveled across the segregated South, personally investigating the stark inequalities in education. He documented the shocking realities, photographing dilapidated black schools with outhouse toilets and tattered textbooks, contrasting them with modern, well-funded white schools just a few miles away. This was not just about gathering evidence, it was about building an irrefutable factual record of the state's neglect. He then used this evidence to argue pivotal cases that chipped away at segregation's legal armor. In the case of Missouri ex rel. Gaines v. Canada, he successfully argued that a state offering a legal education to its white citizens must provide a substantially equal opportunity to its black citizens within its own borders, a ruling that forced states to either integrate or spend enormous sums to create separate but truly equal facilities. This was the core of his legal theory, the deliberate and patient demonstration that separate could never, in reality, be equal. His pupils, who would go on to become judges and even Supreme Court justices, carried his doctrine forward, culminating in the landmark Brown v. Board of Education decision, which he did not live to see. His life forces a profound question: how does legal strategy, this patient accumulation of precedent and evidence, drive genuine social change? Charles Hamilton Houston proved that the most durable transformations are often built not in the streets alone, but in the quiet, painstaking work of the courtroom, a legacy of strategic brilliance that finds a vibrant parallel in an artist who used color and form to challenge the very boundaries of perception. The stage lights blazed on a Chicago theater in 1940, illuminating a revolution in motion. Catherine Dunham moved with an electrifying grace that was neither strictly African nor European, but a powerful synthesis of both. Her performances were more than entertainment. They were living anthropology, a direct challenge to the exotic stereotypes that had long plagued black dance on the American stage. Dunham was a dual force, a University of Chicago-trained anthropologist and a visionary choreographer who founded one of the nation's first black ballet companies. She refused to let her intellectual and artistic identities be separated, using each to fuel the other. As dance historian Joanna D. Das explains, Dunham's deep fieldwork in Haiti, Jamaica, and Trinidad was not just research for a thesis, it was the source code for her entire technique. She lived within the communities, learning the sacred and social dances, understanding their cultural meaning from the inside out. This scholarly rigor allowed her to translate authentic Caribbean and African movements for the modern concert stage, not as a caricature, but with profound respect and innovative flair. Her contributions radiated in multiple directions. She codified the Dunham technique, a comprehensive training system that strengthened the dancer's core and isolated muscle groups, enabling the polyrhythmic movements central to African diaspora dance. This method became the bedrock for a generation of performers, from a young Eartha Kitt to later icons like Alvin Ailey. Her activism was as intentional as her choreography. On tour across the United States, she wielded her contract as a weapon against segregation. In one pivotal stand in Louisville, Kentucky, she learned the theater would be segregated. She immediately informed the management she would not perform. Faced with canceling a sold-out show, the theater owners relented, and that night's audience became one of the first integrated audiences in the city's history. This was not an isolated incident, it was a consistent policy, using her commercial success as leverage for social change. Her legacy extended beyond the stage into the heart of a struggling community. In 1967, she established the Performing Arts Training Center in East St. Louis, a city reeling from poverty and racial strife. Here, she offered more than dance lessons. She provided a sanctuary where underserved youth could discover discipline, pride, and a connection to their cultural heritage through movement. Her methods, emphasizing the African roots of American dance, quietly filtered into the foundational vocabulary of jazz, modern, and eventually hip-hop, shaping the very rhythm of popular culture without most people ever knowing her name. How can performance art bridge cultural divides? Katherine Dunham answered by making the stage a classroom and the body a text, proving that the most powerful diplomacy can be a gesture, a rhythm, a story told without a single word. Her life's work of uniting disparate worlds through movement finds a stunning parallel in a pioneer who united humanity with the silent, airless world of space. The voice from Mission Control was calm, but the numbers scrolling across the screen told a different story. Apollo 13 was crippled, its oxygen venting into the void, and the only way home was a single, precise trajectory around the moon. In that moment of crisis, the flight director did not ask for a computer printout alone. His command was simple: get Katherine Johnson to check the numbers. Her life's work had prepared her for this. As a mathematician at NASA, she was known as a human computer, a title that barely captured the genius of her orbital calculations. For years, she and a team of brilliant black women worked in the segregated West Area Computing Unit, their contributions essential but officially invisible. The writer Margaret Lee Shetterly, who helped bring their story to light in Hidden Figures, captured Johnson's core belief: she knew that the numbers did not lie. This faith in data, in the unshakable truth of mathematics, guided her through the prejudice of the era and the immense pressure of the space race. Her work was the silent engine of American spaceflight. She computed the trajectory for Alan Shepard's first American spaceflight, and when the era of electronic computers dawned, her role became even more critical. Before John Glenn embarked on his historic orbital flight, the astronaut himself insisted on one final verification. He trusted the machine, but he demanded that Katherine Johnson run the same numbers by hand. Only when she confirmed the computer's results would he agree to climb into the capsule. This was more than a check of calculations. It was a profound transfer of trust from machine to human intuition, a testament to the reputation she had built through flawless work. Her impact extended beyond single missions. She co-authored a pivotal report on the equations for orbital rendezvous, and her meticulous verification built the foundational confidence in the technology that would eventually land men on the moon. The Presidential Medal of Freedom, awarded to her late in life, was a long overdue recognition, but it could never fully measure the quiet certainty she provided in moments of extreme peril. Her story forces a crucial question about our own technologically dependent world. How many of the systems we rely on every day, from the GPS in our phones to the algorithms that manage our finances, are built upon layers of unseen expertise, the work of people whose names we will never know? Katherine Johnson's legacy is one of perfect accuracy, a reminder that behind every great leap forward, there is often a mind quietly, steadfastly doing the math. This commitment to rigorous, life-sustaining calculation finds a powerful parallel in a woman who used data and passion to sound an alarm for our entire planet. The humid air of the Amazon was thick with the scent of damp earth and the distant growl of machinery. Chico men stood with a line of fellow rubber tappers, their families beside them, facing down the bulldozers sent to clear their forest. In 1980s Brazil, this was his non-violent weapon, a blockade of human bodies called an impate. He was not just an environmentalist, he was a rubber tapper and union leader who understood that the survival of the forest was inseparable from the rights of the people who lived within it. Anthropologist Mary Allegretti, who worked closely with Menz, explained that his strategy of impates was a profound act of courage, literally standing in front of chainsaws to halt the clearing, forcing the world to see the human cost of deforestation. His vision was one of radical alliance, building a powerful coalition between rubber tappers and indigenous tribes, groups who had historically been pitted against each other, but who shared a common enemy in the relentless advance of cattle ranchers and land speculators. He knew the forest intimately, not as a resource to be stripped, but as a living system that sustained their way of life. His activism was rooted in this deep, practical knowledge. He founded the National Council of Rubber Tappers, giving a collective voice to a dispersed and marginalized workforce. His most enduring idea was the concept of extractive reserves, areas of the rainforest where local communities could sustainably harvest rubber, nuts, and fruits, creating a viable economic alternative to wholesale destruction. He argued that the forest was more valuable standing than burned, a message he carried from the local seringal to international stages, slowly gaining global attention for the plight of the Amazon. Yet his most profound work was often the quietest. In the evenings, by the light of a kerosene lamp, he would gather fellow tappers and teach them to read and write, empowering them with the basic tools to understand the legal documents and land titles that threatened to dispossess them. This act of education was as revolutionary as any protest, turning passive victims into active advocates for their own future. His success, however, made him a target. In December 1988, he was assassinated by gunmen hired by ranchers, a murder that shocked the world and tragically cut short his movement. But his death did not silence his message, it amplified it. The global outcry that followed forced the Brazilian government to establish the first extractive reserves in his name, and his model of sustainable, community-based conservation became a blueprint for environmental policy worldwide. His life forces a difficult but essential question. How do the localized, seemingly small acts of resistance, like standing before a bulldozer or teaching a neighbor to read, ignite the kind of global awareness that can truly shift the fate of an entire ecosystem? Chico Mendes proved that the fight for the planet is always, at its heart, a fight for human dignity, a belief that resonates in the work of a scientist who fought for dignity on a microscopic scale. In a Honolulu laboratory in 1915, a young chemist named Alice Ball achieved a medical miracle. She stood at a bench surrounded by glass beakers, holding the key to a problem that had tormented humanity for centuries: leprosy. For generations, the only known treatment was cholmugra oil, a thick, painful substance that burned the skin when applied topically and caused severe nausea when swallowed. Patients faced a terrible choice: suffer the disease or suffer the cure. Alice Ball, the first woman and first African American to earn a master's degree from the University of Hawaii, refused to accept this. Her mind, sharp and methodical, saw a solution where others saw only failure. She dedicated her thesis to a single question: how could this oil be made usable? Historian Paul Wormiger, who would later rediscover her work, stated plainly that Ball solved the problem that had baffled scientists for years. Her breakthrough was chemical and elegant. Through a process of esterification, she isolated the active fatty acids of the oil and transformed them into a form that could be safely injected into the bloodstream. This was the Ball method, a treatment that was less painful, more effective, and could be administered without the horrific side effects. For the first time, thousands of patients confined to leprosy settlements like Kalaupapa could receive real relief, a chance at a more dignified life. Her work was immediately put into practice, becoming the global standard for leprosy treatment for over 2 decades, until the advent of antibiotics. Yet, at the moment of her triumph, tragedy struck. Alice Ball died suddenly at the age of 24, her thesis unfinished and her name unprotected. A senior colleague, Arthur Dean, continued her work. He published the findings, mass-produced the injection, and claimed the discovery as his own, calling it the Dean method. For years, Alice Ball's contribution was a footnote, her legacy erased from the scientific record she helped write. It was only through the persistent efforts of researchers decades later that her story was rescued from obscurity. In a long overdue correction, the University of Hawaii officially recognized her achievement in the year 2000, placing a plaque in her honor. Her case is a stark reminder of a systemic silence. How many other potential cures for today's diseases lie dormant in forgotten notebooks, their authors lost to history because they did not fit the expected image of a scientist? Alice Ball's quiet chemical revolution, a life-saving act of ingenuity nearly stolen, finds a powerful parallel in a diplomat whose own work for peace was conducted away from the public eye. The hotel on the Greek island of Rhodes was a world away from the battlefields of the Middle East, but in 1949 it became the center of the world. For months, Ralph Bunche shuttled between hotel suites, carrying proposals and counter-proposals between Israeli and Arab delegations who refused to sit in the same room. He was a diplomat and a scholar, the grandson of a slave, working with an unflappable patience that his colleague Brian Urquhart would later call his greatest weapon. When the final armistice agreements were signed, ending the First Arab-Israeli War, Bunche had achieved the seemingly impossible, a feat that earned him the Nobel Peace Prize and made him the first African-American laureate. Yet, his name never gained the household recognition of his contemporaries. His influence was woven into the very fabric of the post-war order. He was a principal author of the United Nations Charter, drafting the chapters on trusteeship that laid out a path for decolonization across Africa and Asia. As the head of the UN's peacekeeping efforts, He became the quiet architect of a new form of international intervention, one that relied on observation, negotiation, and the fragile building of trust. His work was never abstract. During those long months in Rhodes, he understood that the real negotiation happened between the formal sessions. He would invite delegates for private walks, listen to their grievances over endless cups of coffee, and reframe their positions to find a sliver of common ground. He once calmed a furious negotiator by simply letting him speak for an hour without interruption, proving that sometimes the most powerful diplomatic tool is silence. Back in the United States, he carried this same sense of justice to the fight for civil rights, marching alongside Martin Luther King Jr. in Selma and arguing that the struggle for dignity at home was inseparable from the cause of peace abroad. He mentored a generation of global leaders at the UN, modeling a diplomacy rooted in meticulous preparation and an unshakable belief in dialogue. The models of mediation he pioneered, this patient, incremental shuttle diplomacy, are still studied and employed in conflict zones today. His entire life forces a critical question upon us, one that echoes in every stalled peace talk and broken ceasefire. What is the true essence of effective mediation in a conflict that seems utterly intractable? Is it simply about finding a compromise, or is it the deeper, more grueling work of building a foundation of trust between enemies who cannot yet see a shared future? Ralph Bunche proved that the most durable peace is often brokered not in the spotlight, but in the quiet hallways between meetings, a legacy of steadfast dialogue that finds a powerful parallel in a literary figure who used the power of words to build bridges of a different kind.